Hey gamers! Welcome back to NickPlays, your go-to channel for everything PS5. Today, we're diving into the spine-chilling world of horror games. Buckle up as we count down the top 10 best PS5 horror games of 2024. There have been plenty of great horror games over the years, some of which have gone on to spawn multi-million-dollar franchises with movies, television shows, and comic book releases. More than most, though, the horror genre is one that has benefited greatly from the rise of more powerful home consoles, which has in turn provided developers with new ways to interact with and terrify their audiences. From heart-pounding scares to eerie atmospheres, we've got it all. Turn off the lights, grab your controller, and let's get started. Starting off at number 10, we have the Quarry. Supermassive Games is a studio that has fully mastered the art of interactive storytelling and thus has carved out a special place for itself in the modern gaming landscape. Its games are about as close as one could ever get to playing a horror movie, with the Quarry arguably being the best example of what exactly the British developer is truly capable of. Some may not appreciate the game's hands-off approach to action, but fans of branching narratives and player agency should love what's on offer here. The game can at times be genuinely scary too, with its summer camp setting being eerily reminiscent of the one found in Friday the 13th. With almost 200 different endings, the game is infinitely replayable too, and also boasts support for up to 8 players. At number 9, we venture into the eerie world of Resident Evil Village. When most people think of Resident Evil Village, Lady Dimitrescu is usually the first thing that springs to mind. However, there's much more to the series' 8th mainline installment than just a freakishly large vampire lady with extendable fingers. In fact, some of the game's other boss fights end up being a lot more memorable and infinitely scarier too. Whether or not Resident Evil can still be classed as a series about zombies is perhaps a matter for debate, but few would dare dispute its position at the forefront of the survival horror game space. Having played such a huge role in both defining and popularizing the genre back in the late 90s, it continues to push boundaries even today, replacing the mindless zombies of yesteryear with far more terrifying foes as it does so. Coming in at number 8, Resident Evil 7. Biohazard has been revamped for the PS5. After a few missteps, Resident Evil 7. Biohazard brings the series back to its survival horror roots while entering new territory at the same time. Played in first person, we're introduced to Ethan Winters, who is lured into danger when his missing wife contacts him. The ensuing adventure is dripping with atmosphere and intrigue as you escape the horrifying Baker family and uncover a supernatural mystery. It's a great game, and made better on PS5 thanks to better resolution, faster loading, and more. At number 7, we have Returnal, a roguelike psychological horror game. Returnal is one of those psychological horror games in which the atmosphere does a lot of the heavy lifting. With this in mind, it certainly helps that the game's stunning sci-fi world is beautifully rendered, with everything on planet Atropos looking incredibly impressive and helping to add to the sense of impending doom that follows Celine throughout her journey like a bad odor. Those who are unfamiliar with the roguelike game formula may struggle with Returnal at first, as playing the game can feel like an incredibly unrewarding endeavor while players are still learning the ropes. However, after a few hours, once they've started to really get the hang of things, they'll discover a one-of-a-kind experience that cements Returnal's place as one of the best horror games on the PS5. Number 6 is the critically acclaimed remake of Resident Evil 2. Despite more than a quarter of a century having now passed since the release of Resident Evil 2, it still remains a certified classic. However, the 2019 remake did an excellent job of reimagining the title for modern-day audiences, with the many technological advancements allowing the team to do things that the original devs could only have dreamed of. Released in mid-2022, the PS5 version of the remake runs at a higher resolution, with better textures and filtering also leading to a much crisper image. The game now boasts support for ray tracing too, which can make a huge difference in some of the areas that rely heavily on their lighting to create a sense of suspense or dramatic tension. As a result, this now serves as the definitive way to experience Resident Evil 2 and is a must-play for any horror game fan who has yet to do so. At number 5, we have the classic Dead Space, remastered for the PS5. Resident Evil isn't the only classic horror game series that's worthy of the remake treatment, as evidenced by EA's decision to revive the Dead Space franchise after a decade-long hiatus. Given the impact that the series once had on the genre, to say that expectations were high for the remake would perhaps be a bit of an understatement, and for the first time in a long time, EA did not disappoint. The Dead Space remake is everything that a modern-day horror game should be, with dark and foreboding environments, phenomenal sound design, and some truly terrifying monsters helping to create one of the horror genre's all-time greats. The majority of motives changes were undoubtedly for the better, but even those that weren't were nowhere near enough to detract from the game's overall brilliance. Coming in at number 4 is The Last of Us Part 1. Given the heavy emphasis that the game places on narrative, it can be very easy to forget that The Last of Us Part 1 is very much a survival horror game at heart. In certain places, it's able to evoke genuine feelings of terror in players and does a wonderful job of building tension and suspense and then using it to hammer home the significance of a particularly poignant plot point or encounter. Although a lot of the hostile humans that players run into throughout the game are fairly generic, the cordyceps-infected creatures that stalk them through the desolate streets and suburbs are anything but. Bloaters, clickers, and stalkers can really mess up a player's day, and the knowledge that one or many of these foes could be lurking just around the nearest corner can help to keep players glued firmly to the edges of their seats. At number 3, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. Whether or not The Last of Us Part 2 really needed a remastered version is debatable. In fact, most will probably argue that it didn't. However, that doesn't change the fact that the game remains every bit as incredible as it was when it was first released back in June of 2020, nor that the PlayStation 5 remaster is now the definitive way to experience it. The game builds upon the strong foundations laid out by its predecessor in just about every possible way, while also bringing its fair share of bold and controversial narrative choices to the table. Its survival horror elements arguably take more of a backseat this time around, but they still play an important role when all's said and done. Number 2 is the highly anticipated Alan Wake 2. Step into the shoes of the troubled writer as he delves into a new mystery filled with supernatural horrors. With its atmospheric storytelling and psychological scares, this sequel is set to be a hit. Released more than a decade on from the first game, Alan Wake 2 improves upon its predecessor in almost every measurable way. It's visually stunning, which really helps with immersion and makes the many jump scares that it throws at players a lot more terrifying than they might otherwise be. The introduction of Agent Saga as the game's secondary protagonist breathes new life into the gameplay loop and really helps to set the game apart, as does the mind place mechanic. Some may not enjoy this particular brand of horror, while others may find themselves wishing for more combat encounters, but most horror fans will likely love what Alan Wake 2 has to offer. And finally, at number 1, we have the legendary Resident Evil 4, now remastered for the PS5. Join Leon S. Kennedy as he fights his way through a terrifying village to rescue the president's daughter. Given the fantastic job that Capcom did when remaking the first 3 Resident Evil games, it always felt as though the Resident Evil 4 remake was going to be one of the best horror games on the PS5. That said, with the original game having differed quite a bit from those that came before it, there were quite a few question marks over how exactly the studio was going to approach the task of bringing the influential horror game up to modern-day standards. What Capcom ultimately delivered was a game that felt almost like a cross between the original title and the previous 2 remakes. The story remains largely unchanged, though characters like Leon, Luis, and Ashley received much better characterization, with the latter's AI also being massively improved. Granted, there were a few questionable changes in the RE4 remake, like the attempt to shoehorn in side quests, though most seem to have been centered more around improving the user experience, and do so to great effect. There you have it, folks, the 10 best PS5 horror games you need to play in 2024. If you enjoyed this list, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Let me know in the comments which horror game you're most excited to play. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay spooky, gamers.